The internet never forgets, but it does delete. Kendrick Lamar's infamous Game diss track, a rumored masterpiece scrubbed from existence before it could ever officially breathe, has just been recovered not by a producer, not by a label, but by an anonymous archivist with a burner laptop and a Dropbox link that was hidden inside a copyright filing footnote. Fans always thought the track was pure myth, a rap folklore legend whispered between studio engineers and legal aides like a classified document. But now that it's been found, people aren't debating whether it's real, they're debating whether it was ever supposed to be heard publicly at all. The scandal started 7 months ago when Kendrick filed a copyright registration for a track titled simply Game. No features listed, no runtime disclosed, no producer credits attached, just Kendrick's name and a cryptic line in the description field, recorded under competitive influence. Industry insiders raised eyebrows. Academics who track music law filings flagged the phrasing, and social media erupted into speculation, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Accusations blurred the timeline. Rival fan bases were arguing. Commentators were sweating. And when a snippet of audio leaked accidentally on a gaming Discord server, the clip vanished within 11 minutes, replaced by an error message that read, "Content removed for jurisdictional conflict." No one knew what that meant until today, because someone just found the full track inside a legal appeal folder labeled Game Not for Release. And now the world is asking the same thing. Who tried to bury it? And why does it sound like the hardest truth the WNBA era of rap culture ever produced? The story of Jersey Robinson's commitment didn't begin on signing day. It began in the psychological tension zones of college basketball recruiting, where hype is currency, but silence is leverage. Jersey Robinson was always a 5-star guard on paper, but insiders treated her like an anomaly long before rankings gave her a seat at the table. She was the player coaches talked about in back hallways, never in press rooms, not because she lacked marketability, but because she carried the one trait institutions fear more than talent: narrative independence. The kind that doesn't wait to be crowned. It crowns itself by forcing everyone else to panic around it. The first escalation wasn't a rivalry. It was a whisper. A copyright filing, oddly enough. A legal aide attending a recruiting summit noticed that Dawn Staley referenced Jersey in a way that didn't sound like recruiting language. It sounded like succession language. She said off mic to a staffer, "Some guards don't get recruited. They get recognized as cultural fault lines." That sentence didn't make broadcast, but it circulated internally like a classified scouting note. Jersey wasn't just being evaluated athletically anymore. She was being evaluated psychologically, how she responds to pressure questions, how she handles institutional politics, how she occupies silence without folding into it emotionally. During her sophomore season, Jersey tore her ACL. The public narrative framed it like a tragedy. The insiders framed it like a test. Rehabilitation gyms became her stage, not for fans, but for psychological observers. She attacked rehab sessions like someone trying to intimidate doubt itself. She logged 3-hour shooting blocks daily, 5-hour conditioning loops, 1-hour mental film reviews where she didn't study defenses, she studied eras. She treated every rep like a deposition, not a recovery. Her high school trainer, the one person who had no institutional leash, saved every moment like evidence for a future storm. One rehab session, recorded on a shaky phone and never meant for public release, caught Jersey wiping sweat off her knees and whispering, "The sport docent loves comeback arcs." But institutions hate the ones who author their own verdict. That whisper felt poetic to casual viewers who later saw it, but insiders knew it was a psychological thesis. Meanwhile, the recruiting world was escalating around her absence. UConn, LSU, Notre Dame, Stanford, the holy quadrilateral of women's basketball recruiting dominance, were all mentally drafting Jersey into their futures like inevitability by default. UConn wanted her for system elegance, LSU wanted her for cultural chaos, Notre Dame wanted her for institutional polish, and Stanford wanted her for intellectual tempo control. But Dawn wanted her for psychological oxygen. The kind that fills rooms without permission, the kind that doesn't trend only after institutions flinch at its pressure, the kind that forces narratives to bend around it like gravity obeying mass, not announcements. LSU fan hubs, led by Angel Reese's Cultural Chaos imprint, started posting speculative edits that framed the recruiting war like it was already a league problem. They said things like, "Dawn Dosen recruit talent. She recruits who can inherit the bill of belief when the league panics mid-era." The bill, a phrase you hear in courts, not commitments. UConn faithful, emotionally wounded by association, tried to rewrite the timeline into a comparison war between Paige Bucher's finesse and Jersey's range. But comparisons are weakness in succession wars. They imply inspiration, not jurisdiction. And jurisdiction was what the internet was starting to decode as the real currency. Then came the first twist that escalated beyond booster rooms and rehab gyms into the digital arena, where fans author allegiance like attorneys author objections. A 6-second clip leaked from a fictional Team USA junior conditioning camp. The clip caught Kelsey Mitchell visiting the facility casually, stopping mid-walk, looking at Jersey practicing deep threes, and whispering, "Coaches love stars. Dawn loves who intimidates belief without needing press permission." That line didn't explode for highlight reasons. It exploded for motive reasons. Motive reasons escalate careers into story arcs that don't ask for league permission to breathe. The internet's psychological autopsy squads started noticing the patterns in her recruitment silence. Jersey didn't speak publicly for 6 months after the Ackle recovery line started trending. But her silence wasn't emptiness. It was leverage. It was oxygen withholding. It was narrative jurisdiction control. It was the kind of silence that makes institutions nervous not because it's quiet, but because it might speak at the worst possible moment for league harmony. And the WNBA offices, they weren't reacting to college commitments. They were reacting to what the commitments implied about who inherits the fire when oxygen stops whispering and starts burning. Because 72 hours after the clip resurfaced, a fictional intern from a fictional sports law compliance committee leaked a 4-sentence audio note. Again, burner phone. Again, no verification. The note said, "Programs crown stars. Committees crown systems. Culture crowns pressure survivors who sit in chairs before spotlights do, and the next chair was mentally drafted months ago. The public is distracting itself with names it already trusts. Harmless to casual viewers, lethal to insiders, because insiders know that chairs don't wait for names. They wait for oxygen succession politics to stop whispering. And oxygen succession politics doesn't ask for permission to fill rooms. It fills them until institutions can't draft around it anymore. Jersey's silence was the escalation. Her injury was the test. Her decision was the verdict. The memo was the indictment. And Dawn Staley wasn't recruiting her into a program. She was psychologically recognizing the oxygen that would ignite before any other culture could audit it into manageable branding. The internet thought this was recruiting drama. Insiders knew this was succession logic. And succession logic doesn't roar. It inherits silently until institutions expose themselves trying to compare or contain it. And that was the cliffhanger that ended the first psychological stage of a story that was no longer about commitments. The final line circulating in underground fan hubs before her official announcement. Oxygen doesn't trend until the sport admits it can't breathe around it. And the sport already sat her down before programs stood a chance. And that's when the internet realized this was the hearing that didn't happen publicly, but shocked fans anyway, because no one expected a guard to author a verdict this early. And now, the spotlight is finally turning. But the oxygen might already be done whispering. And in the next stage, someone powerful is already sitting in the chair the draft cameras haven't mentally mapped around yet. But the public doesn't know the name yet, because the name doesn't matter until oxygen stops whispering. And the oxygen, it might already be done. The recovery of Jersey Robinson's commitment timeline had already proven one thing. Institutions can scout talent, but they can't scout psychological ignition timing. Now the story shifts into the media machine, the place where careers don't just get discussed, they get emotionally sentenced by public momentum, narrative pressure, and factional belief wars. After her sophomore Ackle tear, the public narrative tried to frame Jersey into a familiar storyline. The prodigy slowed by injury, rebuilding quietly, returning humbler, grateful, reformed. The league and recruiting programs wanted that arc. It comforts sponsors. It pacifies booster rooms. It fits the digestible documentary mold, but Jersey didn't follow the mold. She contested the arc by living opposite to it. Instead of going quiet for healing, she went quiet for jurisdictional ambiguity. She didn't talk publicly, but she talked in rooms where microphones weren't meant to be live. Rehabilitation facilities, junior camps, closed conditioning gyms, nil strategy hallways, sports psychology huddles, and draft-adjacent meet-and-greet rooms became the arenas where her silence was not absence. It was pressure fermentation. 1 week after surgery, a local news reporter tried to interview her outside the ortho clinic. Jersey smiled politely for the camera, gave the usual athlete recovery optimism, and the cameras rolled away satisfied. But a secondary mic, accidentally left on by a student intern covering medical documentation, caught the line she whispered to her trainer once the press crowd dispersed. "They want a recovery arc. I'm writing a return doctrine." A doctrine, not a statement, not a quote, not a tweet. A doctrine is a manifesto disguised as calm tone. And the trainer, a man who had seen players fold under injury, but never seen one weaponize recovery into narrative sovereignty, didn't post it publicly. He archived it, saved it, filed it into a folder on his phone labeled Post-Era Leverage. The internet would meet the line later. But the story was escalating long before its public discovery. Meanwhile, UConn was entering a new psychological season of its own. Gino Auriemma was facing questions not about recruiting, but about maintaining cultural relevance in a league that trends personalities harder than championships. UConn, the dynasty of methodical dominance, was now being measured against chaos tempo programs like LSU, narrative tempo guards like Caitlin, cultural tempo icons like Angel, and coaching tempo phoenixes like Staley. UConn faithful were already wounded by earlier comparisons, and now they were projecting their anxiety onto the next guard they believed should inherit the sport's oxygen by default. LSU boosters, watching the narrative friction build, tried to escalate the recruitment tension by leaking edited highlight reels of Jersey that emphasized her aggression, her speed, her unfiltered swagger in scrimmages, her 40-plus point training gym runs, her unreleased three-pointer streak sessions. The boosters captioned it, "If you can't draft her physically, you can't draft her psychologically either." That line was rhetorical to casual fans, but the phrasing was jurisdictional to insiders because the next era wasn't being drafted by stats anymore. It was being drafted by psychological permission frameworks that don't need league signatures. But LSU's escalation attempt backfired narratively when neutral fan hubs started noticing the difference between program-authored chaos and player-authored inevitability. LSU was loud, Jersey was quiet. LSU packaged fire, Jersey carried it like it didn't need packaging. LSU shouted succession, Jersey sat down in silence like succession didn't need press approval. And this is where the second psychological fracture began to metastasize into league-wide media tension. Indiana Fever's social media managers, who usually stay on the WNBA side of commentary, were being dragged into the conversation like witnesses being subpoenaed into a case they didn't draft themselves into mentally. Fever fan hubs were posting denial-based video reels arguing that Jersey's fire is college-level dramatics, not league-level succession logic. Their hashtags read like emotional objections filed without attorneys. Fever ariant, Starsten in Harit Bacher, Kulturekent Bench Indiana, Jersey's college problem not ligefer. The denial was loud, but loud denial in succession wars is weakness. It confirms the institutions feel psychologically contested. Because contested arcs don't trend for highlight reasons anymore. They trend for inheritance reasons. Then, 4 weeks into her recovery season, a major sports psychology commentator invited Jersey into a closed conditioning session with 3 other guards, Caitlin Clark, Paige Buchers, and a lesser-known 4-star guard from a fictional junior nil pipeline. The conditioning session wasn't about three-pointers. It was about who can psychologically stare at a room full of pressure and make pressure blink first. Caitlin, who carries range like thunder, dropped 32 straight deep threes in a 15-minute block. Paige, who carries finesse like light refracting through expectations, hit 28. The lesser-known guard hit 19. But Jersey hit 40, not in 15 minutes, in 11, because she treated every shot like a deposition against doubt itself. The gym erupted into stunned silence, not because of the numbers. Because of the tone of inevitability behind the reps, Kelsey Mitchell, who was also there conditioning quietly, stopped mid-walk and said off mic, almost like someone reading precedent law from muscle memory. Oxygen carriers don't get interviewed. They get inherited after everyone else exposes who they're scared of. The student intern recording the conditioning session tried to ask Mitchell if Jersey reminds her of anyone. Kelsey, eyes cold but voice controlled, answered in 8 words, "She doesn't remind. She arrives without paperwork." And then Kelsey walked away. The internet didn't see it until later, but the phrase was already circulating like legal precedent in underground culture hubs. And now, the media machine realized something unsettling. Jersey wasn't limping into a recovery arc. She was sitting in a succession chair without asking to be drafted into it publicly first. Chairs are symbols, but symbols in this sport aren't decoration. Their territory claims on psychological oxygen. The upload spike across YouTube and Instagram exploded again when the student intern clip resurfaced 5 months later. Showing Jersey practicing in an empty gym, the number 22 on a jersey draped over a chair under a single spotlight. No name on the jersey, no sponsor logos on the chair, no press banners in the arena, just a chair, a jersey, a number, and a spotlight that looked like it was late to the coronation but early to the collapse warning. YouTube commentators were dissecting it like legal documents revealed more than scouting reels ever could. Fan bases were fighting for narrative ownership. Sponsors were backing off quietly. Execs were going private. Broadcasters were rescheduling segments. Coaches were watching the uploads like succession testimony. And Alicia Tornabez, she liked 6 forensic breakdown videos in a row. No explanation, just likes. Likes are harmless to casual viewers, but likes are jurisdictional framing to insiders. And the biggest twist, the escalation wasn't about which program Jersey would choose. The escalation was about which program would flinch when oxygen carriers sit down before the spotlight crowns them. Because 7 minutes after a forensic analyst posted a 19-minute psychological breakdown video on YouTube dissecting Jersey's rehab and conditioning timeline, a major UConn booster, an older alumnus who usually stays off social platforms, commented one sentence under the upload. Oxygen doesn't ask for permission. Programs only inherit it if they survive reacting to it. That comment gained 1 million likes on its own, and then the booster deleted his account 4 hours later. No apology, no statement, no follow-up. And that's when the internet realized this story was never about recruitment strategy. This story was about which institutions psychologically survive oxygen carriers who sit down early and force narratives to audit them by silence instead of press conferences. And right now, the oxygen wasn't trending loudly anymore. It was trending by the silence institutions were trying not to explain publicly, because Jersey's next move wasn't a quote. It was 4 words posted silently on her private training manager's Instagram story, visible only for 8 minutes before deletion. South Carolina won't flinch. Story deleted, internet stunned, careers sweating, and the cliffhanger shaping the next stage of the case. If South Carolina won't flinch at oxygen carriers sitting down early, then the real question isn't why Jersey chose South Carolina. The real question is, what happens to every other program when oxygen carriers decide the era they want to inherit doesn't get drafted by default? It gets audited by silence until institutions expose who they're scared of. And the internet doesn't need the answer spoken loudly anymore. Because the spotlight might already be late again. The commit announcement didn't just shift momentum, it shifted temperature. And temperature in this ecosystem spreads faster than proof. By the time South Carolina dropped the official commitment graphic, the internet already had its own unsanctioned narrative courthouse built and waiting. The comment sections weren't applause halls anymore. They were jury benches. Every fan hub was emotionally invested like a stakeholder whose identity lived or died in where Jersey sat, not where she signed. The first wave of fallout wasn't analysis, it was emotional possession. UConn faithful treated her silence like a locked deposition. LSU fans treated it like a cultural torch handoff. Fever hubs treated it like a threat to their professional era branding. And South Carolina loyalists were the only faction escalating with calm confidence instead of defensive desperation. Their pages didn't scream, they declared inevitability without trembling. recognized before drafted. Hash firedosen transferitselex. Jersey oxygen. Donkalek stormswingerithum. Every hashtag was typed like a legal stamp. No exclamation points. No apologies. No tonal flinching. Because the fans who actually survive pressure don't escalate by shouting. They escalate by jurisdictional calm. But broadcasters, they were escalating by the opposite. Tactical containment through overanalysis, scheduling pivots, and institutional hedging. ESPN's morning panel had planned to run a 7-minute breakdown of Jersey's recruitment, focusing on nil money, culture fit, draft pipelines, program comparisons, and projected starting timelines. Instead, 14 seconds into the segment, the senior anchor received a message in his earpiece that made his face drop like a gavel hitting an empty bench. Pull the segment. We don't have clearance for framing competition language. Clearance, framing, competition language. These weren't studio problems anymore. These were jurisdictional anxiety markers. The broadcast didn't just get pulled. It got replaced by a WNBA League Growth Appreciation reel featuring purple and white gradient lighting, soft crowd B-roll, and one generic voiceover line about unity. The internet ratioed it so violently the upload didn't last 9 minutes. The issue wasn't the graphic colors. The issue was the tone of containment instead of recognition. Meanwhile, in an empty South Carolina conditioning gym, Dawn Staley was watching Jersey practice like someone studying precedent, not performance. No mic packs, no press banners, no assistant coaches hyping the reps. Just a chair at center court, a sweat towel, a water bottle, and a guard hitting three-pointers like each rep was psychological testimony, not recruiting propaganda. A student manager tried to record it for B-roll. The internet saw it first. Because the next twist hit when a 2-minute clip resurfaced from a fictional nil compliance hearing. The hearing wasn't about nil money, it was about framing rights over competition language inside copyright descriptions. One fictional lawyer argued, competitive influence phrasing implies combat intent, not contractual authorship, Your Honor. Another lawyer countered, but combat intent is the birthplace of cultural oxygen in dis-ecosystems, Your Honor. And the fictional judge, sharp, calm, unimpressed, said one line that hit the timeline like a verdict disguised as narrative escalation doctrine. Eras don't collapse from noise. They collapse when the oxygen arrives early, and institutions flinch at breathing around it. The clip hit 6-8 million views on YouTube before the legal outlet tried to scrub it. Again, too late. Because this was where the WNBA ecosystem's psychological draft logic collided with college basketball's recruitment logic publicly for the first time. The sport wasn't measuring Jersey by her nil valuation or her program fit anymore. It was measuring her by the one thing that changes eras more violently than money or range or finesse ever could. Oxygen succession psychology. And succession psychology doesn't roar. It ferments quietly until institutions expose themselves reacting to it. UConn's program historians tried to spin Jersey's arc into a remix of Paige Bucher's recruitment, focusing on Paige's elegance, ACL recovery, sponsorship arcs, pressure profiles, and system finesse. But UConn faithful were emotionally wounded narratively when Alicia liked 3 forensic videos analyzing Jersey's rehab arc, Jersey's conditioning arc, Jersey's chair imagery, and Jersey's oxygen succession logic. Because comparisons in succession battles confirm who institutions are mentally trying to draft around, not who culture already mentally recognized first. Meanwhile, fever hubs were escalating denial campaigns narratively, posting clips of Caitlin Clark hitting 30-plus point games, interviews about league politics, Team USA selection pressure, and veteran succession framing. But denial escalations in succession ecosystems are like defensive filings. They don't stop fire. They confirm someone is narratively radioactive to institutions who don't know how to brand oxygen safely. LSU fans were escalating admiration threads narratively again, but admiration threads aren't endorsements. They're territorial grief you disguise as hype. And hype-disguised grief escalates drama into psychological case doctrines that don't ask for league permission to breathe. South Carolina loyalists were escalating the opposite, calm inheritance language. They posted edits of Dawn Staley speaking about Jersey's psychological fire arc again, but not in loud broadcast rooms, in back gyms. Dawn said off mic in a clip that resurfaced again and hit 11. 4 million views. Oxygen carriers don't get scouted into eras. They get inherited by the coaches who don't flinch when oxygen fills rooms before spotlights crown it. And that line didn't explode because it was poetic. It exploded because it was jurisdictional succession testimony. Because by now, every faction, UConn, LSU, Fever, broadcasters, agents, sponsors, analysts, were being psychologically measured against one metric: who flinches when oxygen arrives early and sits down before the spotlight drafts it into something manageable. And the only faction that hadn't flinched narratively, institutionally, or psychologically was South Carolina, which meant the era wasn't being recruited into the spotlight. It was being inherited by the institution that doesn't flinch when oxygen carriers sit down early and force narratives to audit themselves around it. Then came the escalation under the escalation. A former UConn broadcaster, now anonymous, uploaded a 9-second audio whisper mid-practice clip. No names dropped. No program logos shown. The whisper said, "Oxygen doesn't apologize for filling rooms. Programs only survive if they learn to breathe without narrating permission." The whisper ended, the clip glitched, the feed went black, and 1,300 words into the escalation, the internet realized this story wasn't about where Jersey signed publicly. It was about which institution didn't flinch when Jersey sat down in a chair the league tried not to mentally draft around until culture forced the cameras back on. And the cliffhanger shaping the next stage wasn't a shouted sentence. It was a question typed by 14 million people across social hubs after the broadcast feed glitched again, one last time. If oxygen carriers sit down before the spotlight drafts them into something manageable, and South Carolina is the only institution that doesn't flinch at oxygen, then what happens when the spotlight finally realizes it was narratively late to the succession chair again? Because right now, the spotlight might already be late, and the oxygen, it might already be selecting the next era's chairholder without paperwork. And institutions who flinch at breathing around it, they might already be cooked. The final escalation phase is where recruiting politics stopped looking like strategy and started looking like psychs, stopped looking like strategy and started looking like psych. It confirms you know you're narratively late, not narratively right. Meanwhile, South Carolina wasn't posting denial. It wasn't posting comparison. It was posting territorial calm. Their fan hubs were posting edits of Dawn stalely watching Jersey condition in back gyms again. Dawn said in the clip, all lowercase caption style, no exclamation points, no tonal flinching. Fire doesn't get inherited by default. It gets inherited by the coaches who don't flinch when oxygen arrives early and sits down before spotlights crown it. And that line exploded harder than any nil pitch ever could, because it suggested Dawn wasn't just coaching Jersey into a program. She was inheriting her oxygen before the league could draft eras around it. The psychological autopsy squads escalated into league-wide analysis videos again, measuring Jersey by oxygen succession logic that institutions fear touching publicly. The recruitment war was no longer about money or highlights or system fit. It was about permission to breathe without narrating permission first. And then, the WNBA ecosystem realized the escalation wasn't about Jersey's three-pointer streak, her ACL recovery arc, or her program allegiance. It was about which institution recognized her oxygen early enough not to try to contain it narratively when the pressure lines landed too close to microphones. South Carolina didn't flinch at oxygen. UConn flinched by comparison. LSU flinched by admiration envy. Fever flinched by denial strategy. Broadcasters flinched by segment pivots. Agents flinched by going private. Sponsors flinched by backing off quietly. And by now, the internet didn't need more proof. It needed a verdict. And the verdict came when a fictional South Carolina student manager uploaded a 9-second silent reel of a jersey draped over a gym chair again, number 22. No name, no caption, just imagery. Because chairs choose heirs before names crown them. And 2 minutes after the clip resurfaced, a Team USA alum posted one last whisper under a burner compliance folder, barely 6 seconds long, but enough to escalate the entire sport's psychological temperature into a new succession crisis again. The league didn't audit her highlights. It feared who sat in the chair before the cameras knew the name. The clip ended, the feed glitched. The screen went black, And the cliffhanger wasn't about Jersey's next three-pointer anymore. It was about the question the entire WNBA ecosystem was now avoiding like a hot mic left too close to a gym chair again. If oxygen filled the room early enough to choose the institution that wouldn't flinch at breathing around it, then what happens when the spotlight finally realizes the chair was never empty? It was pre-inherited psychologically. Because right now, the spotlight still hasn't turned. And in this sport, spotlight timing is always late. But oxygen? Oxygen arrives early and sits first. The track was deleted, the documents were sealed, the insiders went quiet, the uploads spiked, the chair became a symbol, and the league realized it was reacting to a moment it never sanctioned publicly. But you're not here to clap politely. You're here because you can feel when a narrative shifts from entertainment into era-defining evidence. This is that moment. Kendrick Lamar's deleted Game diss track wasn't found in a studio session or producer vault. It was recovered in a copyright appeal folder, flagged by institutional anxiety, leaked by accidental witnesses, and inherited by culture before the spotlight ever turned its cameras toward it. And now that the track is real, the bigger question isn't harder than the bars themselves. Who owns the right to frame fire in this industry? Who inherits oxygen when institutions go silent instead of endorsing it? This story was fictional, but the temperature of it, that was real. Because real WNBA fans, real rap culture followers, real legal documentary watchers, they don't track careers by headlines. They track them by fractures, silence, pressure psychology, and who gets feared before they even trend. And if you're still here at the end of this video, it means you're built for the chaos under the story, not the story under the chaos. So now it's your turn. Comment below with the one question the league offices and labels are still trying not to phrase publicly. What do you think really happened behind closed doors? Was the track deleted because of offense or because of inheritance fear? Drop your theories, share this video, subscribe to the channel, join the witness wave. Because the next time a track or a guard or a cultural fire carrier gets recovered from silence, the world won't ask if it's real. It'll ask who was scared of it first. And the scariest stories don't end with answers. They end with the moment the spotlight finally realizes it was narratively late again.